Today, we are hosting the third and final panel discussion for this year's Kwame Ture Memorial Lecture Series, courtesy the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago. A special and warm welcome to our audience on Facebook and YouTube who have already joined us. We invite you to join the conversation at any time during the session. I'm Dr. Claudius Fergus, the moderator for the panel, which is entitled Pan-African Perspectives in a Post-COVID-19 World, Challenges for Pan-African Solidarity. This year, the Emancipation Support Committee is collaborating with ECOSOC, the Economic, Social, and Cultural Committee of the African Union. And this collaboration is indeed tangibly expressed in the theme of the entire Pan-African Festival for this year, Advancing Pan-African Solidarity Toward a Balanced World. We have 4 discussants, each joining us from a different country and on both sides of the Atlantic. Their names are Okunini Obadele Kambon, who is a distinguished linguist, a senior research fellow, and head of the Language, Literature, and Drama section of the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana. So he's joining us from Ghana. Okunini Kambon is also known by his stool name, Nana Kwame Pebi Date the First. That means we have Ghanaian royalty in the house, Nana Akwaba. Next, we have Sacred Sister Comrade Dr. Chenzira Davis Kahina, Director of the Caribbean Cultural Center in the College of Liberal Arts at the University of the Virgin Islands. So she is joining us from the Virgin Islands. Welcome to the panel, Dr. Chen. Next is Mr. Bokar Toure, who is an African-focused energy and infrastructure project manager, and he is joining us from the Republic of Guinea. Brother Bokar is the son, another son, I should say, because we had one last week. His brother was here last week. He is a son of Kwame Ture. Welcome to the panel. And the final member of this panel is Dr. Kafra Kambon, joining us from right here in Trinidad and Tobago. Brother Kafra is the founder and former chair of the Emancipation Support Committee. He is now its director for regional and Pan-African affairs. And I should say, he is no relation to Okunini Kambon. Baba Kafra, welcome. Welcome all. Akwaba. If you were in the audience, as a matter of fact, at the beginning of the launch of the series, which took place on the 27th last month, you would have heard the voice of Kwame Ture in a short video reaffirming that the prime ingredient of African empowerment is the ability to organize. Organization is power, Marcus Garvey would have said earlier in the century. Each of our panelists is a living example of a highly successful Pan-African organizer. I will now invite the panelists to say a little more about themselves, especially their work as a Pan-Africanist, in 2 minutes. We start with Okunini Kambon.
All right, very good. I hope I can be heard, and I thank you for having me, Medasi, I would say in the Twi language of Ghana. As far as myself, I'm here, located at University of Ghana. And first, I would say that I actually am related to Baba Kafra Kambon because all Black people are relatives. Maybe not directly related, but I call him Baba because I would see him as my father. I hope he would also see me as his son. So yes, definitely, you know, some I've Good. I think I've dropped off for a second. Can everyone hear me clearly?
Yeah, you got stuck a little bit. You froze a little bit. So
okay.
Continue.
I'll take it from the top.
We're hearing you clearly.
So
yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm somebody, a lot of my activism, what people may have heard about was a Gandhi Must Fall campaign. We had a statue of a rabid anti-Black racist called Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi that was here at the University of Ghana. We were able to lobby to get that sacrilegious statue off of the sacred soil of the land of Black people. Other things that we do, we teach combat sciences, indigenous Black combat sciences to youth here in Ghana, what's called capoeira, right? So I teach that here. I've taught that to students at Nima and Tema. Lots of different work, you know, teaching the youth in places like Jamestown, which is considered to be basically like the projects here in Ghana, Charlie Wate Festival, and just various other things. I work 24/7 organizing Black people. I have a bbtumi.com, which is an alternative for those who want to escape from the cracker digital plantations like Cracker Book, YouTube, Nitwitter, Instafool, and these other places that support the very enemies that we're supposed to be fighting against. So I'll keep it short. You said 2 minutes. I think in the actual discussion, I can say more about myself. I'm installed as Bamuhine Chidomhine, which is a traditional military title here in Ghana. I'm also a senior research fellow. I'm a husband to Kala Kamban and a father to 4 children, Ama, Kweku, Akosia, and Ifya. And I'll keep it short there, and anything else we can find out during the actual content of what I have to say.
Medase Okuni Kambon. And now I invite Sister Dr. Chen to say a few words about your work.
Greetings, Hotep. I greet you in peace. First and foremost, I'm very grateful for the invitation to even share some voice offerings of activism linked to Pan-Africanism for this 3rd lecture, especially in honor of the illustrious comrade and Pan-Africanist Kwame Ture. May his good works be respected and continue to be duplicated. I come from a variety of organizations, so for those that desire to focus on the academic portion, yes, I am part of the administration with the Virgin Islands Caribbean Cultural Center at the University of the Virgin Islands, which is one of the only HBCUs in the Caribbean. My connection to Pan-Africanism comes from my familial roots within the Caribbean through my parents, particularly my father, Nana Charles Davis, as well as my mother, Eulalie Davis. I've done a lot of work in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, serving as cadre alongside the All African Women's Revolutionary Union, serving as a part of the leadership within the parent body of the Universal Negro Improvement Association African Communities League, RC 2020, which does have its international convention happening later this year in August in Los Angeles. I've had the honor and privilege through the work and leadership of ancestor, comrade Kwame Ture to be assigned as part of our organizing work to work with the efforts in Burkina Faso under the leadership of Thomas Sankara and our cadre. Some went to engage and learn, and some of us returned and lived for a while before I came and returned to our Caribbean spaces to continue organizing. I also serve as part of the executive committee within the Caribbean Pan-African Network. And my focus has always been on how do we implement action programs beyond the theoretical framework of the total liberation and unification of Africa with social governance that is grounded in Ma'at, truth, justice, order, reciprocity, balance, divine righteousness, and harmony, which I've learned as a high priestess in Per Ankh and Smaitawi. Giving thanks. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. Let me now invite Brother Bukar to introduce us to his work. Brother Bukar.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bokar Ture. First of all, I would like to thank you for this invitation and to note that it's my pleasure to be with this eminent group of panelists. Hotep, assalamu alaikum. The name is Bokar Toure. I have worked in a variety of organizations. Of course, I grew up on the laps of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and I also joined the party. I want to also give a shout out to the London chapter for its contribution to my development. I also worked for the Griot Society, the Black Achievement Fund. Also, I had a stint at the NAACP, and I note that to say that I've had the full spectrum of ideological approaches, and most recently as a member of the Pan-African Council. My other hat is my professional hat, where I've been involved in, depending on how you want to call it, whether it's economic freedom fight or this fight to develop our homeland, the African continent, to rid it of poverty in the best way that we can. So I'm part of that movement with a number of other people across different countries that are doing their part to, as some would say, build the future Wakanda. Thank you.
Thank you, my brother. Now let's hear Brother Kafra Kambon for the final introduction. Yes, Baba, go ahead. Your mic. Unmute. Yes, unmute.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Okay, evening to everyone on the panel and all those who are listening as well. And it's my pleasure to meet at least one person on the panel, I think at least two for the first time, even though the meeting is virtual. And just a little about myself. Academically, I went to the University of the West Indies, and that began an important grounding in relationships with the people, because I was there from the period of 1966. That's the time when another Toure, Brother Kwame Toure, who was Toklika Michael at the time, made his declaration of Black Power, and that really had a tremendous influence on us at the university at the time, because we were already involved in social activism, going out to the communities and teaching children in the disadvantaged communities, and that I was in the guild and we encouraged students to take part in that kind of activity. In addition to which, the university in 1969, well, that time I was no longer a student. My student days ended in, yes, it did end in 1969. But before they ended, that's when we formed the National Joint Action Committee in February of 1969, the organization which was eventually to lead the Black Power Revolution in Trinidad and Tobago in 1970. So after that, I worked with other organizations, a number of other organizations. When I left the National Joint Action Committee, I think that was in the early 1980s, around 1983, I think. I left the National Joint Action Committee, worked with some other organizations, and in 1992, that's when the Emancipation Support Committee was formed with a brother who has departed, now among the ancestors, Brother Lij Yasu Omowale, and I were co-chair of the organization at that time. Now I am the Director of Regional and Pan-African Affairs of the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Baba. In the next segment, each presenter will have about 10 minutes to speak to specific issues on the topic. If you are now joining us, we are discussing the topic Pan-African Perspectives in a Post-COVID-19 World, Challenges for Pan-African Solidarity. Now, COVID-19 has affected every aspect of our lives. So I think it was only appropriate for us to end this year's lecture series by looking beyond the current pandemic. I'll talk about just one setback before I introduce the panelists. And that setback to me affected me in a significant way. And that was the abortion of the planned transatlantic direct air link between Africa and the Caribbean. The inaugural flight by Nigerian Air Peace had in fact occurred in December last year. A number of you might remember that. Regular flights were scheduled to begin in March of this year, the very month that all airports in the Caribbean were locked down. Now, one could easily visualize the revolutionary impact of an air bridge between West Africa and the Caribbean. Of course, not everything about COVID was negative. This very panel, for example, speaks to one of the positive outcomes from the pandemic. The enforced dependency on conferencing technology, such as Zoom and StreamYard, has opened up new possibilities in Pan-African collaboration across the globe that we have never really explored before. And there's so much more to explore, of course. So let's bring in at this time Okunini Kambon to address the topic. Okunini, take it from there. Yes.
Okay,
your
if
mic,
I can be
your mic
heard.
Is muted. Your mic is
okay.
muted. Okay, yes, go ahead.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, I just wanted to share. Sure. I didn't have an entire slideshow presentation that I wanted to give, but I did want to just show a few quick things. One thing is that when we think about Pan-Africanism, most people, let me not say most, that there are various streams that are identified as such. One of which is what's referred to as continentalism, where it's whoever happens to be on the continent, whether or not they're Black. However, if you look at the initial declaration of the 1900 Conference on Pan-Africanism, where the term was coined in the run-up to it, you have that it's very clear that they're using the term Negro, African, and Black interchangeably. And to that point, basically what we get to is that once we understand Pan-Africanism, one of the core things that we have to understand is that it's on the basis of common ancestry and common descent, and that's the only operation that's ever been on the planet Earth. So, for example, we can see something like this. This is Arab League, right? So this is to say that no matter where they are located, that they understand that they are all coming from the Arabian Peninsula. And you have those who advocated Pan-Arabism, like Nasser, like Gaddafi. Nasser said that Gaddafi was the successor, the heir apparent in the fight for Pan-Arabism, which he fought truly, indeed. The name of Libya, for every single second he was in power, always had Arab in the name, in the official name of Libya. So we see that there is this entity called an Arab League, and you can see Pan-Arabism, but we ask the question, where is our Kometu, Black People League? Now, why do I bring this up? It's because the first instantiation that we have of Black people coming together on the basis of being Black was in what was called classical Kemet. And Kemet, again, translates to land of Black people. And at that point in time, we called ourselves Kometu. So if we see this, then we understand that modern day Kemet, we could talk about classical Kemet, ancient Kemet as the ancient nation state. But what we really come to is that once we understand this means land of Black people, then we would understand that Haiti is the land of Black people. We would understand that Jamaica, even though there are occupied portions, it constitutes a land of Black people. We would understand that, Trinidad and Tobago, even though there are occupied portions, just like there are occupied portions of the continent that we are now referred to by the Latin name of Africa, that once we understand what our name is supposed to be, that tells us what our direction is supposed to be in terms of a true Pan-Africanism, which is Black people coming together on the basis of being Black. And when we look, the further we look back into our past, the further we will see into our future. Now, in 1884, 1885, you had a white man named Otto von Bismarck, who basically decided what Africa was going to be like, and that's a lot of the borders that we see right now. So the vision of a white man, the descendant of the Amu, who are our classical enemies in classical times, is the one who gave the vision of what the land of Black people was supposed to be like. However, in contemporary times, we have another white man named Stan Lee, who is a comic book author who's given us something called Wakanda. And now many of us, are saying the same thing. So we've gone from one white man's vision of what should appropriately be called the land of Black people should be to another white man's vision of what the land of Black people should be. And for me, that should not be the case. Even when we say Pan-Africanism, we have to ask the question, why should we call the land of Black people Africa? Because indeed, the Provincia Africa Proconsularis, that name came into effect at the time of the Second to Third Punic Wars, after Carthage was defeated by Rome, and they decided to name this little thin strip of coastal land Provincia Africa Proconsularis, and we're talking about 146 BCE. And this is a case of synecdoche or pars pro toto, where they took the name of this teeny tiny little thin strip of land and then extended it to the entire continent. However, anytime we conceive of this continent that I'm on right now, anytime we conceive of it in our own languages, we call this land the land of Black people. So in the Tree language of Ghana, when we say Abibiman, the Bibi translates to Black. So Abibiman translates to the nation or land of Black people. In Yoruba, when we say Ile Adulawo, we're saying land of Black people, coming from Dudu, which is to be Black. When we say in Bambanakan, which is the Bambara language, when we say Farafina, it comes from Farafin, which is a Black person, and then Farafina, referring to the land of Black people. In Wolof, when we say Real Nitkunyul, we're saying land of Black people. When we look at Kikongo, we'll have something like Nsia Bandombe, which again translates to land of Black people. If you look at the Igbo language, anytime we conceive of this land, we conceive of it as Alandisioji, again, the land of Black people, literally those who have black heads. Now, even when we look at non-Kemetiu languages, you can look at Latin itself, where we have Niger, Niger, which is the root of Nigeria in Niger. When they conceive of this land, they conceive of it as the land of Black people. If you go to the Greeks, they say Ethiopia, Ethi being burnt, and then Ops being face. So this is the land of those of the burnt face. Even the Arabs who have overrun what we now refer to as North Africa refer to this land as Bilad al-Sudan, land of the Blacks. Now, why is this important? There's a proverb in Kiswahili that says, Ukirithi jina rithi na mambo yake, and that translates to one who inherits a name must also adopt its affairs. So once we understand that we have a name like Africa, well, what was Africa but the conquered province of Rome? But once we conceive of it in our own languages, and we'll say, oh, well, maybe all of those are just modern day terms. But when we go back over 4,000 years to Kemet, this is the first instantiation that we have of us calling this land that we are on now as the land of Black people. And then we also find in the pyramid text of Nestle B.T. Pepe, where he's referring to the people as Kemetiu, again, translating to Black people. So when we're talking about Pan-Africanism, we have to first understand who is our constituency, who is among those who the people who invented even the word Pan-Africanism were mentioning. And again, it comes down to Black people. Now, the significance of the name is that if you are calling this the land of Black people, as soon as you have the Amu, the non-Blacks, who are stealing platinum or stealing coltan, we would say, hold on, this is the land of Black people. You're not allowed to do that. This is the land of Black people. When you see them stealing uranium, we would say, hold on, this is Kemet. This is the land of Black people, or this is Abibiman, the land of Black people, or this is Ala Ndicioji. But as soon as you have a meaningless name like Africa that is etymologically opaque and semantically vacuous, then anyone can come and say that they're African. You have Dutch Boers who say I'm African because the name doesn't tell you anything. You could have Arabs who say I'm African, I'm a North African, because the name doesn't tell you anything. But again, once you have the conceptualization of this land as a land of Black people, this tells you for us as Black people, our name is our constitution. And again, the only operation that has ever been in existence on the planet Earth is about common ancestry and common descent. Everyone else who gives you any ideology, anyone who gives you any religion, anyone who gives you any miseducation that tells you it's about something different, all of them are doing that in order to serve their common ancestry and common descent, because they know that once you're confused about that, that's going to help their progeny continue to live on. So again, when we talk about Pan-African solidarity, we have to understand that what we really need to understand is the scope of the nation of Black people. That would include West Papua New Guinea, that would include Bougainville, that would include the Sidis in India, that would include all the Black people on the continent and the Caribbean, that all of this is the land of Black people. And once we start to organize ourselves as a nation, then we will once again be able to protect our common ancestry and common descent, just as everyone else protects their common ancestry and common descent. And I'll round up by saying that I don't think that Kemetiu, which translates into English as Black people, I don't think that we're any less intelligent than any animal on the planet Earth. Now, why do I bring this up is because if you look at anytime we are surrounded by non-Black enemies, we come together on the basis of what we have in common. But this isn't unique to Black people, and it certainly didn't start at the 1900 Conference on Pan-Africanism. Every creature that is intelligent comes together on the basis of common ancestry and common descent. Buffaloes are smart enough to do that. Now, are you telling me that Black people are not as smart as buffaloes? Because when they come together on the fact that, look, we're all buffaloes, they're not holding hands with lions saying we're all mammals. They say, guess what? We have common ancestry, we have common parents, we have common descent. Those are our children that we're here to protect, and they come together on that basis. You can find salmon are willing to come together on the basis of common ancestry and common descent. Orcas are willing to come together on the basis of common ancestry and common descent. Lions come together against hyenas on the basis of common ancestry and common descent. Hyenas come together against lions on the basis of common ancestry and common descent. However, this is how we are. We say, I know your kind have been slaughtering and eating my kind for thousands of years, but I don't hate you. You are my brother. We are both animals. I don't see species. And it sounds just as silly when Negroes say it. However, Nana Marcus Garvey warned us against trying to hold hands and say, mammals of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your zoo cages. He said, in a world of wolves, one should go armed. And one of the most powerful defensive weapons within the reach of Negroes is the practice of race first in all parts of the world. So I'll leave you with that if we understand that wildebeests know to come together on the basis of common ancestry and common descent, if we understand that elk know this, wolves know this, that Black people are no dumber, and I would say that we are at least a bit smarter than those, except for those who have been miseducated by our common enemies who have got us thinking about égalité, liberté, fraternité, and all these other highfalutin and sounding concepts in order to serve their common ancestry and common descent. Because once we're confused, well, guess what? They're able to take our land, our resources, and our very lives. So this is, again, the only operation that's ever been in effect that is striving for life, striving for the life of our ancestors, and striving for the life of our descendants, our progeny. And I'll leave you with that. Medamasi, I thank you. So when we talk about Pan-African solidarity, it's about Black people coming together regardless of location, and not location coming together regardless of whether or not those who happen to be on the continent now known as Africa are Black or not. Medamasi, thank you.
Medamasi Ukuni Kambon. And now let's hear from Dr. Chen. Over to you, Dr. Chen.
Greetings. I'm going to start based on what I was asked to highlight in regard to the impact that this COVID-19 pandemic piece has had on affecting each and every element of life for all humans, and then specifically to those of us that live, work, engage with Pan-Africanism. And I'll use the term Pan-Africanism for the purposes of what's shared herein, and I'm very grateful that our illustrious Baba has shared, Nana more correctly, has shared that even the term we use has a lot of impact on how we engage as sustaining solidarity. The definition that I elected to share for the purposes of this particular convening, and especially to respect the time so that all of our information could be shared equitably, is around that which was brought forward through the works of the Honorable Comrade Kwame Ture. Pan-Africanism is the total liberation and unification of Africa under a scientifically socialist government. And for some, because English is not our first language and we speak other colonial languages, some are blessed, and I see it as a blessing, to be able to embrace our ancient, ancestral, as well as contemporary African languages, because it brings a different cognitive engagement for how we begin to look at Pan-Africanism in terms of solidarity, which is one element, but then taking it to the level of authentic comradeship. What are we willing to work and do together, irrespective of birthplace? Some of us were born in the Caribbean. Some of us were born in the continent. Some of us were born in Eurasia. Some of us were born in North America, South America, Central America. And we are at a place in 2021 that is now being pivoted against a very intentional, not a ma'afa, but a very ma'angamizi, an intentional disruption, not just distractions of our very core of our humanity. So even the efforts for engaging in liberation and unification and upliftment of ancestral indigenous persons coming out of that Nebu, Afrika. When I say Africa, I'm speaking of it as the soul and the flesh of that which is guided by light, those ancestral people. I recognize that because we're using this language of English, because sometimes when sister queens, when African queen mother warriors like myself begin to speak in this form, it comes across a little bit like too direct, too strong. It's not sanitized enough. For the purposes of these next 7 minutes or so, I'm asking for us to come and listen with a very open, a very methodical, very justice-centered perspective on what has affected our ability to engage in Pan-African efforts, whether it's through restitution, repatriation, reparations, reparatory justice, harmony and unity, and outright respect for one another, regardless of the language we speak, regardless of the birthplace that happened to be where our beloved mothers placed us and pushed us forward, and regardless of whether or not you have a PhD or you have none of that. Because some of the wisest persons, some of the wisest sages, some of the most progressive organizers and comrades that we have do not go through the maze of Eurocentric academia. And I just like to make sure I give that foundational piece first. A lot of the work that has transpired here in not just the Virgin Islands, because while I'm here in St. Croix, and I do work between St. John's and St. Thomas as well, a lot of the efforts here, a lot of the foundational Pan-Africanists were usually marginalized before COVID-19. I'm going to say that again. Many of the persons involved in Pan-African movements, global African engagements, ancestral African efforts, whether it was to deal with education, whether it was to deal with economic development and community building, whether it was to deal with jurisprudence and law, whether it was to address some of the ills in our community, specifically the warrior class, because persons tend to just say guns and violence and black on black crime, but ideally, these are warriors that we just have not prepared the place for them to do their warriorship, or else there would not be this black on black engagement and violence that's tolerated to the point that we think there's normalcy to that. That affects our Pan-African solidarity. We are dealing with a rape culture and a form of violence that has been launched initially at women and girls, but has also, because of the lack of Pan-African solidarity, now further compromised by our inability to be in shared physical spaces, because we are washing our hands, Several times we are dealing with sanitizing everything. We're wearing a mask. We are engaged in social distancing, which is really physical distancing to a level that even the efforts that we were engaged in before March 2020, they have been further compromised. There was a thrust, an ongoing effort of brothers and sisters throughout the earth of African ancestry that were returning to the continent, all 12 million square miles of it, and engaging in investments and school building and hospital and clinic development and much more, utilizing our resources right here in the Caribbean Americas. And I speak of the Caribbean as the center and bringing it to the North and South Pole respectively, because it is the center, and taking that effort into the continent. And just as was shared by Dr. Fergus, there were efforts to even address transport, air transport, so that persons no longer were forced to have to go from the Caribbean into North America or Europe to then come south to go into the continent of Africa. And that created fear for that 1% that we tend to refer to as the ruling entity of the planet, those that exude their power to the point that anything that appeared to restore the ancestral sovereignty of people from our ancestral homelands throughout the globe, it created a form of terror to many of them. And so different efforts have manifested, whether it was to increase fees on travel to the continent, whether it was to make it not only cost prohibitive, but to make it seem as if there were all of these irreparable types of activities in the continent. And it was so anti-West and so anti anyone who came, even if they were from the African ancestral pool, that persons many times were afraid. I've heard it many times. Me nah want go Africa. Africa, which part I there? I drop my bucket here. And that's what persons will say in these regions, because we have not strengthened the internationalization, I'll put it in that terms, of the benefits of strengthening Pan-African solidarity. Many times persons aren't studying to be engaged in, whether persons are in a work study circle like what is facilitated in the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Again, the organization that's linked to that. Again, whether it's to study the course of African philosophy as brought forth by the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey in the UNIAACL RC 2020, which is ongoing, and establishing Garvey Honor Societies, whether it is to be involved in looking at some of our phenomenal historians, ancestors, as well as those that are still living amongst us, giving us all types of cultural heritage, historic, educationally accurate and effective techniques for breaking this yoke of not being engaged in unification, authentic unification. I need to say that, authentic liberation, and being unapologetic on how we engage in our ancestral sovereignty. That has been completely decimated in regards to the COVID-19 pandemic and the efforts that are linked to that. So I desire to encourage all that are listening. And again, as I said, I'm asking that we share this and you receive this with a very open mind, because it is not easy when some of us come out of our comfort zone in the Pan-African movement to start to really highlight health, wellness, and executive security. We might speak about army and militia and that we need to be protected, but many times we do not engage in the strategic methods that are efficient on how we engage in protecting our sisters and brothers, our families, our children, so that nobody could just come in, fly out of a helicopter, drop in your yard, and kill everybody. or assassinate leaders because you have differences. That is this frequency of assassination and apparent natural death of African leaders is not new. What happened in Haiti is not new. What happened in Tanzania is not new. If we go back a moment and start to look at what was effectively organized against the Pan-African efforts of solidarity from the 50s, come all the way up to 2005, 2006, 2007, it was a succession of assassinations of African leaders to dismantle Pan-African solidarity. And it was the assassination of not only men, we tend to remember the men's names and list them quick. And then we forget some of the others, the women, that also hold up what people say is the other half of the sky. I'm going to pause for a second because it can get emotional, because sometimes when we speak about Pan-Africanism and solidarity, I like to take it to the place of what are we really willing to sacrifice to come together? What are we really willing to bring forward and look at to really understand this situation of how even today is recognized or designated by UNESCO as the International Afro-Descendant Women's Day? What are we doing to support nations like Cuba in this region? What are we doing to support nations like Haiti or the Raizal Nation that's highlighting Pan-Africanism and solidarity? How are we tying this to our brothers and sisters that are in the continent? How are we tying this to our brothers and sisters that are in West Papua New Guinea or Vanuatu or Mauritius or UK or France, Germany, elsewhere, and Central and South America, Limon, La Otra, Costa Rica, etc.? What are we doing? And how do we move that forward so that we do not allow medical terrorism, medical apartheid to control our movement? And there are some suggestions, there are some pieces, and I close with this particular quote. And this is coming from a publication by very profound, intelligent, and quite engaging African woman who is a board-certified medical physician, Dr. Nancy Turner Banks, from her work entitled AIDS, Opium, Diamonds, and Empire, the Deadly Virus of International Greed. And I quote as I close, "The demons of capital and free market ideology have created an information monopoly by gaining control of the pharmaceutical industry, the teaching of physicians, the major media, including medical journals, and the flow of research dollars. They control a clandestine intelligence agency, the Epidemic Intelligence Service, which has silently infiltrated every major health department, hospital, newspaper, and medical journal across the nation and the world, enabling its control of information and the mounting of a consolidated response at a moment's notice. The research dollars determine if there's going to be a war on cancer or a war on AIDS, or the promotion of the latest viral scare to sell more vaccines or worthless antiviral products such as Tamiflu or Relenza. A more pernicious outcome of these medical wars has been the silent loss of personal sovereignty and the loss of the most sacred and inalienable right to the sanctity and security of our own bodies and the free choice and right to select the medical treatment that we deem best. Information is power, but access to accurate medical information has become proprietary because of the privatizing of public resources. The idea that an individual has the right to be adequately informed to make a medical decision has become an arcane notion. Again, from the work of Dr. Nancy Turner Banks, I want to highlight board certified MD. And I encourage persons to look for that publication and study it so we understand why COVID-19, Delta, and whatever additional viral strain will be manifesting, because that is the intention to these things to be manifested, so that Pan-Africanists place health and wellness along with executive security first, so that we can authentically have unification, liberation, and social governance that restores justice, truth, balance, harmony, and that it's reciprocated. Giving thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. And we go now to Brother Boka over to Guinea. Brother Boka, it's all yours.
All right, thank you very much. My presentation, and it's a PowerPoint presentation, which I'll have to apologize for its look. I did it maybe 5 minutes before the presentation, but just to help me as an aid. I work a lot of time as a consultant, so it should be a presentation that looks sexier than it does, but it's, as I said, just an aid. I'm not sure if it can be put up as we speak. All right, the presentation itself is exploring alternative pathways to the 21st century Pan-Africanism. It's sort of a compliment to my elder sister, Dr. Chenzi Ra's comment about how do we strengthen the internalization of Pan-Africanism. There's also, you know, a modern context that we sort of have to take into account into doing so. So the presentation is much more on that. If we can go to the next slide, please. All right, this is a map here that you will see of Africa before colonialism. I'll wait for the slide to come back up. As the slide comes back up, I will mention an anecdote. There is a king named King Sakura, who was a king of the Empire of Mali, somewhere between the founder of the Empire of Mali named Sundiata Keita and the Mansa Musa. And I know him because he's become quite popular as of late. King Sakura took a pilgrimage, like many Africans of that date who adhere to the Muslim faith. And he traveled from that far western coast where you see the Mali Empire. And he traveled through where you see Fulani. Then you see Hausa. These are different states. Then you see the Empire of Kanem at the southern border, all the way to where you see the Kingdom of Aksum. A lot of people would travel to the left of that. There's an area called Darfur. This doesn't show you all the kingdoms, but it shows you some of the kingdoms at least. And there's a few between Kanem and Aksum. And he traveled through Eritrea, which is where the Christian Ethiopia is, to go to Saudi Arabia, which is the landmass on the east of Africa, where it says Umayyad Caliphate. On his way back in Eritrea, he gets attacked by a group of people who, I think they're of the Afar ethnic group. This is 1285. This is well before, maybe 2-3 centuries before any African was exported to the Americas. So this is the history of all of us. So he gets attacked and he loses his life. But they're able to bring back his body all the way to the other side of Africa, particularly by the help of the Empire of Kanem Bordu, which is right in the middle, and it's in actual Chad and East Nigeria. There's a reason I mentioned this. This is not just to give you a story of history, but it's to tell you by 1285, Africa was much more interconnected than it is today. If you were to look at the map of Africa today, it would not look anything like this. What does travel look like today? In 1285, this king could have traveled all the way to Saudi Arabia and come back and be helped along the way, and his body be carried by different people. Today, if you were in Nigeria, just like if you were in Kingston or Trinidad, if you were to look at the major destinations of most of Africans in those places, you would see most likely London, New York, Houston. If it's a Muslim country, you would see Dubai. While in this case, he was going to Saudi Arabia, but he traveled through all of these different areas in Africa. And there's a band, there's interchange, which does not exist today. And this is key to building a community. And it's something that we're completely lacking. If you were to talk to your average Nigerian, and I'll bring up Nigeria again in the sense that they make up a quarter of sub-Saharan Africans, and I think 1/9 of Africans of Africans in the world, if you don't take into account the ones that are of Nigerian origin. Most of them have no interest in going to any other place in Africa. They're more interested in going outside of Africa, no interest in traveling. And this is not just like my elder sister had mentioned, people don't want to go to Africa. And that's a big problem. COVID itself has only accentuated that because most countries are closed off their borders. Now that is understandable because of sanitary reasons. I myself am in Guinea, where in the middle of the COVID crisis, we also had to deal with Ebola, epidemic, which was successfully controlled quite quickly in the region where it was. But yet it has brought a lot of constraints to our movements, and this is an issue that has to be dealt with in an innovative way if we want to be able to integrate ourselves, right? Because we've talked about coming together. That's the key to Pan-Africanism. And so how do we do that? So before I bring my suggestion into this discussion, I would like to, revisit Pan-Africanism and some of its advances. Next slide, please. So you have the Pan-African movement. I'm sorry for this picture, which does not have any sisters, and there's a whole list of them that should be here. I just picked this one off. But obviously, whether it's Amy Jacques or Amy Ashwood or Garvey, Shirley Du Bois, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker. There's a whole list of Yas Antiwa and Zinga of other sisters that should be there. My favorite would be Mawina Kuyate of the All African Women's Revolutionary Union. But anyways, how did it begin? The Pan-African movement began as a intellectual civil grassroots movement. I'm not sure where different people have different places where they place the beginning. Obviously, Trinis will mention Henry Sylvester Williams and that's a good point for us to start. You have the W.E.B. Du Bois also, but I think key to the Pan-African movement is the Pan-African conferences, quite a few of them, and the most notable one is the one in 1945. I cannot recall if that was the 5th or 8th. I'm sorry at this particular point, but I'm sure the panelists and other people watching could correct me. And this was the baton from that older generation. There was a 5th, thank you. From that older generation of Pan-Africanists to sort of this new leadership of Africans, most notably Kwame Nkrumah, and Kenyatta, and so forth, who returned to the African continent and led these movements to free their nations from colonialism. Now, there's a statement which Kwame Nkrumah made during the independence speech, which was "Seek ye first a political kingdom." And that, I think, said a lot about the movement at the time to free Black people from oppression worldwide. It was a fight for political self-determination. Pan-Africanism successfully contributed to fight against slavery in the case of IT and the fact that it was able to set an example across the African world. I mentioned in the US, Denmark Vesey himself having been born on one of the Caribbean islands. After that, you also had the fight against second-class citizenship. And then to this one, you had the fight for political self-determination. In Africa, you had independence. In the Caribbean, same. in the United States, you had the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, which obviously had an effect everywhere else around the world, the Caribbean included. So there were all of these advances from it, but since then, I'm not sure that we can note too many. At least after the apartheid struggle from the 80s onwards, Pan-Africanism has sort of faced a number of constraints. Next slide, please. One of the weakest links, if you ask me, and excuse me for using that term from the British show, I believe is economic development. Wherever we are, you see poverty. I'm in Guinea. The depth of poverty here is quite sobering, to say the least. And that is something that you see across the continent. Brother Kamban in Ghana can mention about the depth of poverty that he sees, particularly in Nima. It is very emotional. And it's, I feel, something that has been, I wouldn't say neglected, but our political muscle has been strengthened. There is a lot of work to be done for us politically, but economically, we are still far behind. And I agree that the political kingdom should be prioritized, or maybe not. I'm not sure. I think it's a chicken and egg. I feel like economics should not also be neglected, and I feel like this is the work that has to be done prior to the modern era. The notable exception to economic development was the Booker T. Washington experiment, and obviously, ideologically, we can have a debate on Booker T. Washington, but the most notable one was Marcus Mosiah Garvey and the Black Star Line. You will see at the left, that's a bond. So you had Africans across the Americas actually buying bonds to start the Black Star Line, which was a trading entity that would trade amongst African communities worldwide. So I feel building the economic kingdom and its agencies, and this is what this presentation is trying to suggest here, is really important. You have two types of agencies currently in this sort of Pan-African state. You have the political governmental institutions, which with all of their contradictions and elitism, if you will, are still important. So you have the African Union and you have CARICOM in some cases, and the major cases at least, who are trying to work towards this sort of economic integration of Africa. We can discuss whether you feel is good or not. You have the African Continental Free Trade Area, which has gone further along than CARICOM has in trying to build an integrated economic space. The importance of that is the fact that a sister that is selling, I don't know, shea butter in the middle of Jamestown in Accra could now be able to sell it anywhere in Africa as far as Cairo or Cape Town. And that sort of changes the dynamic. Next slide. So in saying what I'm saying is I'm not pushing here for a neoliberal sort of economy. I am doing so in one that is collective, one that is communal, and one that rejects sort of the inequities that capitalism creates. But I, again, feel like this is something that needs to be given greater attention. And obviously, I'm not the only one that feels that way because of the constraints that we as Africans feel. So I should go back to some of those constraints. At this point, if you would look at Africa, you have the emergence of secessionist movements. Just last week, you had the the leader of the Biafra movement in Nigeria that was arrested, the leader of the Yoruba movement that was arrested. These are people who want to create their own states and separate from Nigeria. Ethiopia right now is breaking along ethnic lines, unfortunately. So while we're trying to go into this sort of big global Pan-African community, there are movements that are trying to break away from their nation states. And yes, their nation states can be described in some ways as reactionary and so forth, but they're still nation states and they're still part of this communityhood. How do we bring the masses of people to understand the advantages of being part of this global community? And there has to be some incentives that have to be created for people to feel this sort of nation building. The political incentives have moved further along than the economic incentives, because if you give people material reasons as to why they should go towards Pan-Africanism, then I think that changes the game. And hence why I brought the example of the sister in Jamestown selling shea butter. There's a quote from Amilcar Cabral which says that people are not, and I'm paraphrasing here, that people are not necessarily concerned about the thoughts and ideas in our minds, so our ideology, but so much more on their material benefits. So basically, you know, their ability to bring their children to school, to feed their children, and things of that sort. And this is on a day-to-day basis what the majority of masses are concerned with. The ideological discussions are important, but the vast majority of the masses are not going to be engaged in those things. So we have to provide them some incentives. What COVID has done is create an opportunity through the digital space. Here we are having a conference, and no one had to pay a ticket for me to go to Trinidad, unfortunately. So I'm doing it here from the comfort of my room in Guinea. This digital space has increased, and you see a lot more Africans involved in it. Now, I'll have to say that, yes, there is inequity. There's a lot of our people that do not have access to the internet, particularly here in Africa. But you will be sort of surprised that, you know, there are some innovative solutions that are being brought up, at least here in Guinea. People, you know, it's been spoken to how many people in Africa in the furthest villages, people have phones, and yes, they do. And now you have WhatsApp. So there's sort of this innovative digital space that could sort of be used to structure a Pan-African network economy. Now you have a lot of people who are moving from different parts of the Americas to Africa and back and forth, investing in different things. It should take on a bigger shape, in a different shape, one shape where it is connected, interconnected. So I'll give some examples here. The sister who's selling shea butter may not have the skills necessary to bring it up to a standard necessary to sell it elsewhere. So there's a sister or brother somewhere in the Caribbean who is willing to work with her, to invest his time and skills, to have the ingredients that are necessary to bring up some of the hygienic standards that would be acceptable for it to be sold in the streets of New York or DC. Then you have, I'm just using a name of someone I grew up with, Tavon Johnson, who is there in DC and is like, I'll be willing to work with you and distribute it to different stores across here. And here you have a network economy, a particularly Pan-African integrated business. And these are the type of things that build a community. Because at one point, Tavon Johnson is going to want to hook up with Dwayne Kambon in Trinidad and the sister Enima, and possibly travel and meet each other. And this is what communityhood is about. Communityhood is about movement. It's about exchanges. And once you do not have that exchange, you just have people in their silos. You don't have communityhood.
Brother Boka, could you summarize, and you can come back to some of those points a little later?
That is my summary here, is that we have to look at the comparative advantages of each region. I feel that in Africa, we have the natural resources and the human resources. And in the Caribbean, we perhaps have skills. And in the US, we have financing. And my suggestion here is that we use this new space and opportunity that digitization gives us to strengthen Pan-Africanism.
Okay, thank you, brother. Thank you, brother. I would want you to expand on that point, particularly the digital economy, when we enter into the next segment. But at this stage, I want to invite Brother Kaffer to address us for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Fergus, and thanks to all the panelists for your contributions. And I'm going to be very much within my time. Take a look at what time I'm starting. I'm very much within my time. Now, I've been asked to speak about, Pan-Africanism, like, going post-COVID and all of that. And I think it's significant because COVID is really having tremendous impacts globally, and including on the Pan-African movement. Even though when Dr. Fergus made his introduction, he did point out some of the positive side of it, not of the COVID, but of the kinds of linkages that we were able to establish despite the COVID. And we are all faced with the fact, no matter who we are, about the ways in which COVID is changing the world. It is speeding up some future trends. And this is something that I want us to pay attention to, because if we look at some of the things that are happening and where we as Africans in the world today are located in relation to the trends that are developing, then it gives us concern and makes us realize that we really have to mind our business in a very serious way at this time. Because look at what's happening to trends that we're already seeing on the horizon. And some of them we have to look at that COVID has had an impact on, is that institutions which serve the public are moving faster with the introduction of new technologies into business. And that is having impacts. One of the areas, for example, is employment. Also the kinds of skills that are being demanded. And I raise these issues because we have to sort of direct our younger people into focusing on some of the skills that are going to be necessary in the economy that is taking shape in the world today. But when we look at what is happening with these things, you say, for example, and I go back to the banks, you see, they no longer need to see your face for most of the transactions which you have to make in a bank. What that means is that you have less counter staff, you have less staff generally, and there's a human side of it too, that human interface. You go, you line up for a couple of hours in the bank, you talk to other human beings, you reach the counter, you talk to human beings. So you're having both a psychological impact as well as a social impact from the loss of jobs that are taking place as a result of technology. Because what is happening in the bank is happening across a lot of business enterprises, where you have technology and machinery replacing people. And generally, even where there's work now, more and more, except at the very lowest levels of the economy, you find that new skills are going to be required in the workplace. So we as Pan-Africanists both have to put a sense of ideology, a sense of who they are into our young people, And with that, we have to give them the guidance in terms of how they are going to be able to survive and to thrive in the economy that is taking shape at present. The other thing is that education, which is so critical, we had the experience this year with what we call the SEA, the secondary, somehow it works out to the secondary school assessment to see those who are moving from primary school to secondary school, what they would qualify for. Because of COVID, many people had to take exams using their computers. Not only that, they had to prepare for the exams with computers. It means that they had to have access to a computer, and they're not in school, so they have to have it either at home or somebody in the neighborhood or family or something. And that computer had to have access to the internet. Otherwise, they could not participate in those classes. Of course, that brought a form of inequality, because I remember that one of the requests that we were getting we are a network of organizations, and some of the requests that came to us was from organizations because they are community-based organizations. And they were looking for laptops for children in their community. Not being wealthy, we could not respond in a big way, but we did respond and provided what we could, both as an organization as well as individuals. We made our small contributions to that process. But the thing is that as a people, we should be better organized. So that even if something like this comes around, you know, the same way people in other communities would not be deprived because their communities would be feeling vested in their children. And those who are in business, those who have wealth, would provide for them. We should have had that kind of community. And that's one of the differences, say, between the African community and other groups in our society. So COVID is putting us in situations that, in a sense, the lessons are good, even though some of the current outcomes are tragic. But the basic thing is that until we really see ourselves solidly as a people, have a sense of looking out for each other, then we are going to fall even further back than we have been falling back already. Because in the education system, even before COVID, even before the problems of internet connectivity and all of that, we as a people have been falling back in that critical area of the education system. And I'm talking for Trinidad and Tobago. It does not apply to some of our Caribbean neighbors. And it is something that we really have to look at very seriously. Then socially, you know, you have the power of misinformation, or you have the consequences of what is taking place in the education system. You have social consequences to flow from that in the future. So we have to be thinking in terms of how are we going to make up for those children who were so deprived. The other thing about the current space is that there is a rare explosion of misinformation. It is a problem the entire globe is dealing with now. You know, even in terms of this current pandemic, it is a big challenge in so many parts of the world, and this is widespread. This is affecting all across the board, where people will not get vaccinated, not based on anything rational, but based on a number of conspiracy theories which are floating around and which are easily seeping into people's imaginations. And I don't mind if it happens with other people. I do mind in a sense, but it is not where I focus my concern. My concern is that we as Africans cannot afford to allow, given our position in society already, globally, we cannot afford to allow other people to divert us from what we need to be doing for our own health, given when we are faced with something like the current epidemic that is taking over the world. Now, we have to look at, from all points of view, where we as Africans stand in the world today. You have the effects of COVID, and you have the effects of all that took place before COVID that was even worse than COVID. And, you know, if we look at where we stand, what the trends have been for a prolonged period, you know, sometimes we win battles. The fact that some of us can call ourselves independent states now, I mean, it might seem like nothing now, and we kind of, well, we fought against the independence leaders because we felt that they were not doing what we would have expected them to do. But the thing is that they had battles that they fought that put us in a position where we could have a clearer vision of the world and come around and attack them. So I'm not sorry that I attacked them because they needed to be attacked. But the thing is that one of the things that the after effects that we suffer from the experience that we have had as a people is what it did to us psychologically in relation to those who had colonized us and enslaved us, etc. And we came, okay, we resented them in one way, but we also came to see them as a kind of ideal, as a sort of superior being. And in the Caribbean, in our own experience, we had independence leaders who people like myself, were very critical of for just reasons. But you look at those behaviors and think in terms of what went into converting people who are otherwise academically brilliant, extremely intelligent, and yet unable, you know, to do the right thing in relation to those who had what colonized them. And it is all because that process had been so thorough that even when you begin to hate their deeds, even when you want to be free of their control, in a sense, you are still seeing yourself in a subservient role. And that's what we saw with a lot of the independence struggles, whether on the continent or in the region. On the other side of it, when you have had real efforts to make a break, and you have had a lot of this on the African continent, you have had the situation where great leaders who could have transformed our reality as African people, they were not allowed to survive. Like Nkrumah, like Lumumba, like Sankara, you know, and so many others. And after that, because of the fact that our countries in Africa, coming out from being sources of human trafficking and a breakdown of states and empires that had lasted for centuries, and they are coming out of a situation of complete dishevelment. The levels of leadership are not so deep. When you take out the top, you really affect what happened on the continent. So we still have to. So the leaders who were Pan-Africanists, like Kwame Ture, he was Kwame Nkrumah. There are so many Toures around now that I am saying Ture, but Kwame Nkrumah and Lumumba and so, who were looking to break free of that mold. And at that time, we, meaning us here, those their people in their own countries in which they rule, were not able to protect them from imperial power. at the time. We have to look out now with all the changes taking place in the world, and I go back to the COVID again and its impacts, because things are becoming challenging for all humanity in a sense, in different ways to different degrees. But the advance of technology that is replacing human beings is becoming more rapid now, because having to deal with COVID and business people, like in banks and all of that, not wanting us to walk into their institutions, have changed the technology. You can now bank without ever seeing a human being in the bank. But you know, and that's nice and convenient, but at the same time, it means that, you know, the challenges for employment. Now, the final thing I want to go to, because I'd rather wait for some questions and so this evening, is that where those who came before us might have fallen down, we don't have an excuse for it. But what is undermining us is not just those historical things that we have imbibed, but what is undermining us, and one of the things I think we have to be careful about, is the extent to which we have almost a religious attachment to some of our differences. And we have to develop a psychology where if something is not harmful in a very concrete way, we have to understand that we are coming to Pan-Africanism. There's no one laid out formula for our African development. So we are coming to it from different positions. We are expressing different ideological viewpoints within it. And we really have to avoid, you know, people becoming very sort of, you know, focused on the ideological differences. We have to know them, we have to understand them, but you have to be looking for the points on which we can agree and look at the ways we could dialogue in ways with each other about how we move processes forward. One of the things that brings that to mind now is the tragic destruction of the Grenada Revolution of 1983. Because here it is, you had people who were all socialists, but some were more doctrinaire, Marxist-Leninists than others. Whatever elements in personality, different personalities there might have been, and all of that, but the thing is that ideological differences that were socialists and not Marxist enough and so were a key factor that was used, perhaps conveniently, by those who just wanted power. But the fact is that had an impact in undermining the leadership of the revolution. And as a result of that, you had one of the great leaders that the Caribbean has seen in recent times, our brother Maurice Bishop, that he was murdered very brutally, and the Grenada Revolution was overthrown, so that Grenada, instead of continuing to advance as it was in that time of the early 1980s under Maurice Bishop, it collapsed and has gone totally back to what it was in the time of Gary, or let us say in the same direction, little improvement. But it is not what it could have been and what the promise of the revolution was. If we make our interest as a people, and I know there are different ways in which we could find to serve or for those interests to be served. If we make that our premium in terms of how we approach things. If we learn from errors of that kind, because Grenada was not the only one, and then we begin to, when we meet, we don't discuss things in terms of a formal ideology. Of course, ideology would guide what we see, but there is no text that can be a complete guide to any of us. We could learn from all. But what is the most important thing is our own experience, our own analysis of our societies. And if we come to our discussions with each other with a sense that, you know, there's a saying about many rivers or something. My head is not working quite right now. But I would say that, you know, if we realize that many voices can help, and unless people are outright reactionary, and therefore we have to dismiss them because their goals are reactionary and all that, but we cannot let little ideological differences lead us into exploding the movement in which we are involved. Because Pan-Africanism, which has a long history, and it was born with the core of the ideology is really the question of getting Africans on the continent together, getting Africans on the continent and in the diaspora together. And that was the thinking behind the conference of 1900, which was organized by a Trinidadian called Henry Sylvester Williams. And it has had its reverberations up to today. So we are having a panel discussion, and we are having discussions, and we are using the term Pan-Africanism. And many people with many different ideologies have come, you know, and advanced under that. I could tell you that even in Trinidad, because the National Joint Action Committee, which I was a part of, the organization that led the uprising in 1970, and there were people who were revolutionary. Some of them were outside of the country at the time. Some were in, and we discovered later that they had a plan to kill us. We're not talking about the state now. We're talking about people who felt that we were not into the theology enough. Because for some people, Marxism and Leninism is a tool, for some it's a theology. And people felt that we were not into the theology enough. And therefore, there were actual plots which we became aware of later on.
Baba, could you summarize now?
Yes,
please?
And I come to an end now. So the main point I want to make is that we have to really center our thoughts on Pan-Africanism as something that brings us together, and let us look for the common spaces. Let us look for those things that we have in common. And we can all have our groups that may have separate, you know, approaches and all of that, but focus on what will serve the interests of African people. Focus on things like honesty and all of that, of leadership as well. And if we move in that direction, I think we'll go closer towards achieving our objectives as a people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Baba. I salute all the panelists for their deep, diverse, and illuminating presentations. And of course, at this time, I want to invite the audience to send in their questions. Those questions would be channeled to me, and I would channel them further to our panelists. In the meantime, while we wait on the audience, the first two speakers cogently made the case for language as a critical tool to intellectual and spiritual empowerment. I want us to explore that a little bit more. One, the value of linguistics to building African consciousness, and secondly, very important, how important is it for Africans in the diaspora to include African languages in our school's curriculum? So the question is open, but of course, I would like to hear the two linguists or the two panelists who address the linguistic question, perhaps kick off the answers to this question. Perhaps Okunini, Kambon, you can start off first.
Okay. Both of us are graciously trying to defer to each other. I think it's very core to the question of what we're referring to as Pan-Africanism, because as I alluded to in my brief presentation, that if we don't deal with that, it leads to a lot of confusion. Because in the English language, for example, when we use the term Africa, people, try to look at the etymology of the word Africa, and it's not clear. You have some people who say it comes from Ifriqiya, which is a Berber ethnic group. Some people say it comes from Ifran, which is a network of caves in the so-called Sahara Desert. There are some who say it comes from Afrique, or Afrique meaning sunny or without cold in Phoenician or Greek. You have those who say it comes from Leo Africanus. You have those who say it comes from Scipio Africanus. There are just a lot of theories about what the etymology may be. Now, regardless of any of those etymologies, none of those etymologies tell us what our destiny is supposed to be and what our work is supposed to be. And again, for Kemetiu, that's to say Black people, that our name tells us who we are supposed to be and what we are supposed to be. So if I see someone whose name is Kafra, that tells me something about what this person is supposed to aspire to in life, right? If I see someone who is named after a Roman emperor, on the other hand, then I would, expect something different, right? Now, again, just going back to the key point of terminology, that if we look at our own languages, anytime we conceptualize this continent that we're on right now, it becomes very clear that we conceptualize this as the land of Black people. But anytime we accept a term that has been bequeathed to us by the Roman invaders who conquered Carthage, what they call Carthage, then it doesn't tell us anything about ourselves. It will be like, here I'm sitting here and I'm called, I don't know, John Stone. There's nothing about my destiny that I could extract out of John Stone other than, I'm supposed to be hard because my name is Stone. It's like I would have to try to give it meaning because it's just a string of sounds. It would be like caveman grunts. However, if my name is Obadele, it translates to the king arrives at the house. Then as soon as I come to the continent, I know how I'm supposed to comport myself. Is not supposed to be like a raging drunk or a crack dealer. Because every time I hear my name, it reminds me of what my destiny, what my mission, and what my purpose is supposed to be. Now, if we think about that, how much more our names for ourselves collectively, and how much more our names for ourselves, and the land on which we find ourselves. So again, if you go to primary text documentation, you can go back over 4,200 years ago to find us calling ourselves Kemetiu, which translates to Black people. If you go to 4,000 years ago, you can find a text called Sanhat, right? And in it, you have the use of, you have another text called Smi and Sakhetipin. And in that text, he says he's going down into Kemet. And again, that translates to land of Black people. And we have to ask ourselves, why are we calling this land a land of Black people? And once we look at it, once we understand that, we'll understand why we built walls to keep non-Blacks, who we call foreigners. We never called them whites. We called them Amu, which translates to foreigners. We will understand why we built walls to keep Amu out of the land of Black people. We'll understand the prophecy of Imahu Neferti that talks about how these Amu, these foreigners, these non-Black people will come into the land of Black people, but a ruler Sarah, Amini will rise up from the south and drive them out. Why would we drive them out unless we understand that our name for our land is land of black people? And then that helps us to understand why are we driving out non-black people? Why do we refer to them as foreigners? We'll understand why the very first military document in the history of the world, that is the autobiography of Imahu Weni, talks about bringing together Upper and Lower Kemet from Medinit in the north to Abu in the south, from both of the two sides of the house, and from Irjet Nubians, from Wawat Nubians, from Kau Nubians, from Majao Nubians, from Chamalan. Literally, when we talk about Pan-Africanism, that is the very first Pan-African military force in the history of the world, and it is occurring over 4,000 years ago. It's talking about bringing together every kind of black people in the entire area to drive the non-blacks out of the land of black people. So when we start dealing with what we call Pan-Africanism, which I think we should even say Pan-Kemetism, if anything, if we're going to speak English, then we would have to understand the timeline of this, that this is not a new thing. It didn't rise with the rise of capitalism, and then whites called themselves whites. Then we started calling ourselves black after that, and like all these narratives that, these exact same descendants of Amu give to us, we will actually consult the primary sources, and then we'll come to see we were calling ourselves Kemetiu in classical times. And as a matter of fact, in all of our languages, we refer to this land as a land of black people. That tells us what our constituency is. And then that again tells us what we're supposed to do when somebody who's a non-black person comes and says, we want to take your oil. Here's Shell Corporation. We'll say, no, this is Kemet, and that's the land of black people. If you're not black, this is not your oil. If they come to the platinum mines, we'll say, no, this is Kemet, and that's the land of black people. You don't get that. If they come for uranium, we'll say, stop, this is Kemet. And that's what we did in classical times. Anytime they came in, you can look 3,500 years ago, the invasion of the Hakau Hasut, who are referred to as the Hyksos. They came, invaded, and then they were driven out by Sarah Sekenen Retau, by Sarah Kamos, and by Sarah Yamos. If we don't understand the meaning of Kemet, we won't understand why we drove them out. Because if they were calling it Africa, well, you're in Africa, I'm in Africa, we're all Africans, anybody can come in. But if we understand the significance, then we'll understand how our destiny, our mission, and our purpose is the exact same destiny, mission, and purpose as it was in classical times. And this is what I call the Dikenga theory of Pan-Kemetism, in the sense that here you had Kemet that rose like the sun and then set like the sun. But then you saw the exact same sun, that black sun, that Ra, rising in Haiti. Now, the people in Haiti probably never read the autobiography of Imahu Weni. They probably never read the prophecy of Imahu Neferti, but they knew that when I got shipped, I was calling myself Fon, Egba, or Yor, Ekiti, and a billion other things. But we realized that once we're surrounded by non-blacks, we come together on the basis of what we have in common, which is we are all black people. You could look at Nana Steve Biko, Steve Bantu Biko. He probably never read a text from Kemet, but he came to the understanding that before these Amu descendants came, we were calling ourselves Mpondomise and Amazulu and Amakrosa and Basutu and Bavenda and a gajillion other things. But we realized once again that sun rose again, Ra rose again, and we came to understand that none of those fragmentary identities mean anything. You're not being raped or sodomized or lynched or lobotomized on the basis of you being Amakrosa and me being Amazulu. So let's come together on the basis of what we have in common. And then once again, that Dikenga sun rose again. Here we have black consciousness. And IT with Nana Jean-Jacques Dessalines declared that we're going to wipe out all the non-blacks, all the quote unquote whites, the French, and everyone on the island is going to be les noirs, right? Les nègres, the black people. You could see the same thing with Nana Paul Bogle when he said cleave to the black, right, in Jamaica. Now, the interesting thing is that they were not necessarily taking notes from each other, even though we know that there was, especially in the Caribbean, people understood what happened in the Haitian Revolution, and then that sparked other things as well. But then you have people in the Black Power movement. You could have the Black Panthers. You could see the Dalit Panthers in India, that time and time again, any creatures, any social creatures on the planet who want to survive, who understand that the only operation has ever been this, life, then we understand that we come together on the basis of what we have in common, being Kemetiu. If we don't understand that, then we use terms, and anything that our enemies give us is designed to confuse us, and in confusing us, that helps them to survive. So if they bequeath to us the Latin term Africa, it's because the term Africa is going to help them to survive. If they bequeath to us the term Nigeria or Ghana and Ghanaians, or Guineans or Cape Verdeans or Jamaicans, all these fragments help us to think that we're separated from each other. But as soon as we start calling ourselves Black, or better in our own languages, Kemetiu, or in Chi Abibifo, or in Yoruba Adulawo, or in Bamanakan Farafin, or in Wolof Nitkunyul, or in Kikongo Ndombe, or in Igbo and DCOG, all of those things are that broad identity that we had 4,000 and 5,000 years ago that helped us to build the civilization that lasted the longest on the entire planet Earth. At the time that we were building this, there was no China, there was no Greece, there was no Rome, and we were able to stave them off. Most people think about Kemet, they say, oh, that's just a placeholder for the word ancient Egypt. And we say the whole point of it is look at our past glory. We did great things in the past, so now let us enter your white societies. But that's not the point of Kemet. Once you start to read the primary text, and you'll understand that the most important thing about Kemet is the name itself. The most important thing about Kemet is that we called ourselves Kemetiu, and then we'll understand how that classical mission is the exact same mission that we have right now, which is to preserve the life, the very life, the ankh of all Black people, our ancestry, our progeny. Our responsibility is to make our ancestors live. Our responsibility is to make our progeny live. And, there's a quote that says we must act as though, we have no one to answer to other than, our ancestors and our unborn children. You understand? So again, the language tells us everything we need to do, because as Kemetiu, our language, our name specifically, is our constitution that tells us what we are supposed to do, who we are, and whose we are. That's what I have to say. That's it.
We have a question from the audience, but I see Dr. Chen, you want to chip in here, so could you? I see. Yes.
It was a short introduction to what was already shared, because the terms we use to define ourselves, we speak about self-determination, Kujijagulia, yeah, and in regard to how we embrace Pan-Africanism, and I'm cautious about the term post. So I'm not going to use post-COVID-19 because it's still in process, kind of like colonialism. And it's really critical that we remember that, yes, we identify as Kemetiu. We also have those terms when we speak of Africa. Many times we're speaking of those ancient, ancestral, African, Nubian, Cushian, Kemetu heritage legacy keepers. So when we're speaking of the Ankh, we're speaking of the Ankh, and we're not limiting it to that geographic space of Egypt, the way it looks now, that they now call United Arab Republic, an attempt to stop us from reclaiming that which is ours from sovereign ancestral times. And I'm speaking of experience going into various temples there and being told that I cannot do this or I cannot do that in those temples. And until we begin to strengthen our Nebu, and when I say Nebu, I'm speaking all, same term as Pan, just not in English. If we're not dealing with that Nebu, Kemetiu, Nubian space, then it becomes a question of exactly what Baba Obadeli just finished sharing, that we're navigating on fragments of our essence as ancestral people of power that are worthy of the liberation and the unification and the harmony through social governance that we have established for millennia. This is not like new for us to do organizing. We sustained civilizations for millennia upon millennia upon millennia. So whether we call it Kemet, whether we call it Nubia or La Otra or Kush or Atepia, we have many names, Ta-Nehesi, we had a number, Takensu, we had Sol Tameri, we had spaces that we always sustained sovereignty. And that sovereignty facilitated what I was highlighting in my commentary earlier, that the language we use is really important because it strengthens the power of the word and it allows for the action to follow. And equitably, and not equally, but equitably, we have to balance that engagement of how we communicate in the language we use alongside our health and wellness. Dead revolutionaries don't do nothing. So we have to live in this particular revolution. I'm going to keep saying that. We have to live in this particular revolution. So health and wellness, our sustenance of our strength, nutritional programs, clean air, sunshine, proper engagement, stress-free environments are really critical while we're mastering this language with culture and sovereignty, of course, inclusive of land.
Yeah, I recognize Boka. Yeah, I know Boka wants to chip in. Go ahead.
Well, I think because the question also had to do with language and teaching other some of our children in the Caribbean, and I think also we also have to pride ourselves of the languages, of the new languages that we've created. So be it in the U.S. Ebonics or even Patois in the Caribbean. I think we also have to celebrate that, because I think there's an attack on those particular languages that we've sort of created that came from our innovativeness, if you will. While we can look at, there's a push for African languages, be it Hausa, be it Swahili or so forth. I think that those are good initiatives, but also initiatives to encourage the ones that also exist elsewhere. Now, on the topic of Kemetu, while I'm not ideologically opposed to it personally, I do know, having lived in Northern Africa, that there are evidence of Afrikia itself being a native to there. Now, we can go on with that debate elsewhere. And I'm not against or opposed to the term Kemetu at all. I think, given the glorious history there, but I think what could be problematic is the fact that there were other Africans that weren't even part of the space. It was probably the most influential at the time. But if you're talking about San people in the southern parts of Africa, if you're talking about Pygmies, or derogatorily known as Pygmies in Central Africa, they had influence by the times they were at battles against the Kemetu space. So I don't know if it's any more inclusive or less inclusive. But I mean, that's just something that I'm throwing out there.
Yeah, that's perhaps a debate for another time. It's a great debate, a big debate. Baba, you want to say anything here before I bring in the audience?
I also wanted to touch on the Nubia versus Kemet, if I can. But
okay, let's hold that for a while. Let's hold that for a while. Okay, let me bring in the audience. Here. This question is coming from our YouTube audience, and it is: how important is land ownership as a tool of liberation wherever we are? How important is land ownership as a tool of liberation wherever we are? Anybody can take a go at that one.
Land is the foundation for all of this Pan-Africanism, solidarity, health, wellness, all the building blocks, civilization. So having this conversation, and we do not have some linkage, authentic connectivity. That's one of the first things that the colonizers, that's one of the first things that persons stripped African persons of, was to get us off the earth, to just like literally get us off the actual soil that facilitated our ability to live and survive. So land is beyond essential. It's one of the foundational pieces. Because with land, we can deal with agriculture. With land, we can deal with architecture and construction and have our homes and so forth, and centers and schools and all of this. We don't have land, then a lot of this other conversation is just intellectual masturbation, essentially, because we don't have anything to draw on. Persons right now in the colonized world are very comfortable. They're telling people to stay home, and they know that the home is not owned by them. Check that out. They're not making sure that we have land to actually stay home on and quote unquote be safe. We need to be very clear. Land ownership is critical. And let me be more specific. Not just ownership. I'm going to use a term that may not flow for everybody, but we definitely need to have some stewardship, some cooperative engagement, so that we know all of these brethren and sisters that walking together, saying we're Pan-Africanists, global Africanists, all these other terms, Kemetu, etc., moving on and on. We need a place to call our own. We can't keep fighting with them and talking we're going to destroy capitalism and imperialism, and we don't have no place to be there. You need land, period. I said
okay, anybody else want to chip in here?
I just wanted to piggyback that with a quote from Omowale Malcolm Shabazz, which says, you know, in his message to the grassroots, that revolution is based on land. Land is the basis of all independence. Land is the basis of freedom, justice, and equality.
Thank you there. Okay, I have a question here. The time is creeping up on us. So let me address the issue of the digital economy, and which was referenced by both Baba and Bokar. And in the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which was launched in January of this year, but of course moving very, very slowly because of COVID. Now, what I want to ask is this: is the diaspora, which is recognized in the AU as the 6th region, is the diaspora explicitly catered for in the African Continental Free Trade Area? And also, perhaps could you shed some light on the prospects of diasporans? And by that I mean particularly the diaspora of the pre-colonial era. You will understand what I mean by that. How could the diasporans of that era, who came out of that era, take advantage of the African Continental Free Trade when it becomes fully operational? So that's the question. In terms of the, and in the context of the digital economy, which means, of course, you don't have to relocate to Africa to participate in the African Continental Free Trade Area.
No, so as far as I know, and I'm not, you know, the biggest, I would say, proponent of the free trade area. I think it's a step in a good direction. But there are a lot of things that, you know, need to be put together. No, as far as I know, the African Union has not catered to its 6 constituents, which is the diaspora outside of Africa, which includes, you know, the pre-colonial diaspora. So no, but there are many ways that you know, Africans in the diaspora can sort of benefit from it, and that's by coming to Africa, partnering with people on the continent to start off new ideas. I think it would depend on sort of the capital ownership, as long as it's produced here in Africa. And I think it would be something that would have to be African, based on an African country at this particular point. Again, I don't see the African Union as the perfect agency for Pan-Africanism, if you will, to drive Pan-Africanism. It is just one of it's a political agency. So you have the political, and you also have the grassroots movements that play just an important role, and probably more an important role than the African Union itself. So I'm just, you know, stating some of the imperfections of the AFCTA, as it's called right now, in terms of bringing Pan-Africanism to what we have idealized it to be.
Baba, you want to chip in there?
Okay.
Let me get an opinion from Baba. Baba, you want to chip in this discussion?
Yes. Okay, I don't know that the African Continental Free Trade Association is yet incorporating the diaspora. And, you know, because it was enough challenge to get 54, now 55, I think it is, countries together in a free trade association. That's an immense challenge. We have much fewer in the Caribbean, and we saw it's been an ongoing challenge. But what I think is important, though, and I think it's going to happen over time, because certainly the African Union from its very birth, started off with a Pan-African perspective and looked to incorporate the diaspora as a part of it. So after the African Union was formed, as early as 2004, you find that senior officials from the African Union traveled to the United States to have their first meeting with the diaspora. And from there, they engaged, I think it's 2002, not even 2004, 2002. And from there, they started to build relationships. And the first outreach that became institutionalized was an organization or one of the structures within the AU called ECOSOC, the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council, because they felt that the easiest way to begin that process of formal integration was via civil society. So they formed a civil society parliament, which, you know, is part of the structure, the governance structure of the AU. We don't expect it to be powerful because governments and, you know, it's just like we have civil society bodies at CARICOM as well. But, you know, governments are very jealous of their power. And if we're dealing with 15 here and they're dealing with 50 something, you know what a challenge it is. So they have made those efforts, and that is so. And as our moderator would know, that we are in constant communication with officials of the African Union within the structure that we are a part of, and we were a part of from its very formation. We became a part of that structure, the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council, one of its arms. We became formally a part of. And unfortunately, the summit between CARICOM, so there's a will there because there was supposed to be last year, was scheduled a date for a summit between the African Union and CARICOM, which is quite significant, and it was scuttled by COVID. And there are efforts to, you know, bring it on in different ways now. So I think that given you have a institution, and we always have to be realistic in terms of what we are dealing with, because you have a range of ideologies, a lot of countries that are very tied in with former colonizing powers and all of that. So even to form a functional African Union at all is quite an achievement and would have taken a lot of the will of a lot of people there. And the fact that they are building this relationship with the diaspora, it's very significant as well. So I think we're on a good path. We have to keep pushing. And I think that people should be pushing, but encouraging, but not avoiding the condemning, because if you know what individual government is, you know what it is. Right now, we have a situation in the Caribbean. Haiti is a member of CARICOM, and Haiti has once more been invaded by the United States, and that's a battle we have to take on. That we have to take on now. And I see our Prime Minister, or some statement was attributed to him after the invasion, because here you have Haiti is a member state of CARICOM. There's a problem. Within 2 hours after the murder of the last president, who probably deserved to be killed anyhow, but after he was killed, the chaos that would follow, CARICOM offered to lead not a military intervention, but to lead a process that could bring the country back to some kind of stability and prepare the ground for proper elections and all of that. Because Haiti has been always massacred by the United States and its the core group, as they call it, the Canada and the European countries and all of that. And CARICOM has been totally ignored in the process. In fact, we are now trying to see if we could, you know, appeal through different authorities to find a way to get CARICOM to play the role it ought to play in Haiti, because all these imperial powers come into, they are still paying the price for having freed all of us who are African.
Thank you, Barbara. We do have to wrap up now. There are some questions that came in. One addresses Okunini Kambon, but I think he is off the radar now. And that is an interesting question. I think he's coming back. Okay, Okunini Kambon. Let me just say this. I want you to make your final statement at this time, but let me just recognize these questions, and perhaps in your final statement, no more than 2 minutes for your statement, please. Absolutely no more than 2 minutes. One person wants to know if Yusuf Ben Jokanan's term Al-Kibulan for Africa, whether what do you think about that? That was specifically to Okunini. And another question refers to land ownership. Which kings in Africa are backing the diaspora on land ownership? A very interesting question. And another one on ancestry. To explain ancestry, somebody wants to know what is the concept of ancestry, and that one is addressed to anyone on the panel. So at this moment, could you make your final statement, please? We would start just in the reverse order this time. Baba, could you start your final statement?
Oh, fine. You caught me. You caught me there. All right. My final statement, not responding to the questions, because I know the
No,
term.
if you address the question, it got to be very, very brief.
Okay, no, I can't. I will not address.
Yeah, we don't have time. We have run out of time.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I would say that it is important that at least we are able to make use of these technologies, and this is something important for Pan-Africanism. And one of the things that we have to do is to push to see that throughout the continent of Africa, that the network to provide the relevant services, it is very, very important for people wherever they live on the continent, whatever influence they have. But that communications, that modern communications setup is very critical, because this is the way we are going to have to meet. We don't know for what period of time, and it's important that we have this kind of communication.
Yes, Brother Boka, your final statement?
My final statement would be very much in line with Baba Kafra. It's that we have to find a new thinking when it comes to Pan-Africanism that uses the tools of the modern age to be able to revitalize Pan-Africanism, because it continues to be absolutely necessary for our survival. And I think it will play an important, for us as Africans to play an important role in tomorrow's world. We need to bring it together, and I think that the methods of old, while still important, do need to find new alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. Final statement.
Yes, I first and foremost just say I give thanks and praise to the Almighty Mother, Father, Creator for giving us an opportunity to share this. It's important that we recognize that culture, healing, arts, technology, and spirituality for life, inspiration, freedom, and edification, a theme around Per Ankem Smaitawi, among other organizations, are highlighted. We do have many names for Africa, Al-Kibulan, the works of the Honorable ancestor, Dr. Yusuf Ben Jokanan, with roots right here in the Caribbean, particularly here in II, in addition to Ethiopia. There are African world kingdoms. There's the CPAN efforts that are very, very focused, as Baba, Dr. Kafra has shared with us, land, economics, agriculture, architecture, technology, the digital space. All of these things are essential to be incorporated, and it's very important that we balance it in truth, justice, order, reciprocity, balance, divine righteousness, and harmony. Ma'at, a very feminine principle, so that our brothers, alongside with equity and balance with our sisters, move Pan-Africanism, Nebu, Kamituism, in all the ways that restore our ancestral sovereignty in contemporary times. Hotep, giving thanks for the opportunity to share.
Thank you. And Brother Okunini, your final statement? Yes, you're still there. Your final statement.
Yes, I'll keep it as brief as possible. So I have an article that I wrote a couple of years back entitled Haiti, Morocco, and the AU, a case study on Black Pan-Africanism versus anti-Black continentalism. And I see the African Continental Free Trade Area as an example of anti-Black continentalism, where you have Black people, hopping into bed with our original and continued non-Black Arab enslavers, to the exclusion of the Black people who are in the 6th region. Now, why do we say this? Because Haiti applied to join the AU in 2016 and was rejected. However, Morocco applied to join, and Morocco at that time had over 200,000 enslaved Black people. And the word Abid means both Black person and slave in Morocco, but they were allowed to join. So I definitely see this as a continued selling out of Black Pan-Africanism. Now, also, when I mention Kemet, I don't mean the nation state. I mean what it actually means, which is a land of Black people. And we can see Sarah Jehuti Mess, who says that my southern boundary is at Wepta, which is the opening of the earth, which is a way to say the equator, that they're not talking about a nation state per se. They're talking about the land of Black people. And initially, the Ifriqiya, there were no non-Black people anywhere on the planet until about 20 to 30,000 years ago. So the entire planet was Kemet per se, the land of Black people. And when you look at the Khoi people, that is a case of reverse migration back into the continent from southwestern Eurasia. People can check that out. Also check out Black Mummy of the Green Sahara, and you'll find that the very first eviscerated mummy was a young Black child and was the Caucasus Mountains of Libya. So the places that we think of as always having been inhabited by non-Blacks were actually Black entirely in ancient times. Also, I wanted to mention in terms of digital, we have the Black platforms. So someone asked me for my WhatsApp number. I told them I'm not on WhatsApp. I'm on OnJaws. I'm on Soft Talk because I intentionally boycott the platforms. There's a book called Towards Black Community Development where Obimfo Manu Ampim talks about how we've had so many conferences and flights where people are going to modern day Egypt for conferences, whereas we should have gotten that same money, which is millions and millions, in order to buy a plane, right? So the purpose is not the conference or the information per se, but it's to actually build Black infrastructure and Black platforms. An example of that would be Abibi Toumi established 15 years ago, where we can actually have safe spaces, where we can actually discuss, what we need to do as Kemetu, as Black people, and not be financing the very same enemies that we're supposed to be fighting against. And again, I want us to understand that when we talk about Kemet, it means land of Black people. This means where I am right now, this neo-colonial cage that they call Ghana, is the land of Black people. That the place called Haiti, where the president was just assassinated, that is also the land of Black people. And that was the worldview of our ancestors in classical times, which is why each ruler said, my southern boundary is further south than my father, and the son who does not fight for this boundary is not my son. What they understand is they're bringing in more Black people. They're bringing in more lands of Black people. Meanwhile, you have Nana Kamos, who intercepted a letter where those exact same Amu were trying to collude with those who are further to the south because they had the idea that those further to the south did not understand that they were Black people. So there's more than I can deal with in these 2 minutes, but I thank you for your time. And I hope that we understand that the real objective of Pan-Africanism, as we call it, is Black people coming together on the basis of being Black, and not anyone who happens to be on the continent, whether they're invaders. And anyone who's not Black on the land of Black people is an invader to the land of Black people.
Thank you. Thank you very much. In bringing this final session to an end, I want to expressly thank our panelists for their great contributions. You would realize this conversation should not end here, but it must. And you have done a great work on your own in consolidating and empowering the Pan-African community. We need to recognize that. And of course, we hope to join forces again soon to continue the work for the global Pan-Africa, and of course a more balanced world, especially in terms of the concept of Ma'at, Dr. Chen. I recognize that important virtue. I want to thank the audience for being with us today, and a very special thank you if you were with us from the launch. That is from the 27th. If you were there for every session, a special thank you. I cannot thank my hardworking team enough. That is the Kwame Ture Memorial Lecture Series team. So I want to mention some of them here in this final session. Sister Amina for her outstanding graphic work to produce our flyers. I'm sure you would recognize that and agree with me. Brother Marcus, whom you don't see, for his videographic assistance. Sister Nzinga, who assists us in setting up each session. Some of you must have seen her. Sister Renee, whom you probably hear a lot when we're setting up. You don't see her, but she's our program officer for the series, and our digital technician who ensures every session runs smoothly. Thank you very much, Sister Renee. And of course, we have the executive chair of the ESC, Sister Zakia, who keep us all on our toes to ensure that everything happens well. And all others from the Secretariat and the board as well who assisted in whatever way. I want to also say thanks to TV6, to TTT, to Talk City 91.1 for promoting every one of our events so far. I want to register our deep appreciation to ECOSOC for working with us to source discussion for some of our panels. We want to thank our sponsors, the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Youth Development, and the National Lotteries Control Board. We have lots of Pan-African activities this weekend. These are emancipatory activities, we can call them, and also for the week ahead. So please visit the Emancipation Support Committee's webpage and Facebook page for details. Happy Emancipation, Hotel.